The first question: when practicing Anapanasati, focusing on a tactile sensation leads to the arising of the phenomenon of light. How is merging with a nimitta in the second to fourth jhana different to absorbing into a light kasina? From fourth jhana, initially the mental image of space, then concept or idea of space, is used as a basis to move into formless attainments. In practicing light kasina, is the visual aspect taken as the object or the concept of light? If absorption in space element leads to arupa ayatana, where does light kasina lead?
So, practicing Anapanasati, it's very common that when your mind becomes more focused, more mindful on the breath, yes, quite often light images, light nimittas arise. The way I was taught in the tradition of Ajahn is actually not to focus too much on the light. So if you're practicing Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, it's not an exercise in light kasina or focusing on the light. It's an exercise in being aware of the breath, knowing the breath and sticking with the breath to the point where maybe, yes, the breath disappears, the mind becomes very still, and then gradually noticing the disturbing factors of the different factors of samadhi. Say in the four jhanas, there's one gradually observes how vitakka, vichara, piti and sukha disturb the mind until the mind is just centered on pure equanimity, the fourth jhana. And then, like you say, you can, if you have the time and the barami, you may go on to develop four arupa jhanas, which are the formless jhanas, like you say, taking the object of infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, or neither perception or non-perception. So light kasina, it's not, light kasina itself is not generally recommended for most practitioners when they're new to meditation. Though it's something you can experiment with. Some people try it, they cut a little disc in a box and put a light inside the box and focus on that light disc, or they focus on a candle flame as long as it's not flickering around. Some people do because they find it helpful to deal with sleepiness, focus their mind on the light and memorize that light until they can remember the light with their eyes closed, or even with their eyes open but no longer looking at the light. They can still bring the light up in their mind. They might practice to that level, but as I said, it's not a recommended practice. Anapanasati or Buddhanusati is much more recommended by our teachers. But light kasina can be a basis for developing to fourth jhana, like Anapanasati. So you have to get to know your character, but I would recommend starting either with, say, Buddhanusati or Anapanasati, and then later, when you're more skilled, perhaps consider light kasina. Tends to be an object people go on to develop psychic powers, special knowledges. And that's not really our main purpose here. Our main purpose is to develop insight into the impermanent nature of the five khandhas, the dukkha of the five khandhas, the not-self of the five khandhas. That's the purpose of Buddhist teachings, but some people do have a lot of skill with jhana, so it's not wrong if you have that skill. But it can be very time-consuming and lead you to not have enough time to do your vipassana practice. This has happened before, so just be a bit careful of that.
Sadhu, Lumpur. the next question. We can see one's sila and kamma can be reflected in a manifestation of one's circumstances. For example, someone with poor sila is quite likely to end up in jail, or someone with jhana is likely to take a high rebirth. Is samsara an external projection of the mind? What is the relationship between chitta and rupa? What is the interface or membrane, if you like, by which they interact? When the chitta detaches from the sense base in arupa jhana, it goes to a place that cannot be touched by world systems, contracting and expanding. Is it a physical realm or a far-off labyrinth of the mind? Can you say Nibbana is the pure chitta without kilesa, or it merges with Nibbana? Is Nibbana a built-in function of Nibbana?
Well, in terms of practicing jhanas, rupa jhanas, arupa jhanas, as I said earlier, it's a constant refining of the state of awareness, abandoning things that disturb the mind, even good things like piti and sukha, abandoning to the point where one attains just pure equanimity. What we call lokiya jhana is not yet the jhana of a noble one. It's, and as I said, quite often people develop fourth jhana and then go on even to develop arupa jhanas and psychic powers, but they're not necessarily practicing for Nibbana. They may be doing it to pursue sort of in one's personal journey, pursue the skill of samadhi to find out, or sometimes also to help people, developing psychic powers to help other people. But the Buddha's teaching is to develop insight into the Four Noble Truths and abandon the mental defilements from the conditioning process. So once they are abandoned, what we call asawa kaya yana, the abandoning of the asavas, this attachment to self, the ignorance and the delusion of self, once that's abandoned, then you're experiencing a mind without kilesa, which we often call Nibbana, or the unconditioned, the unborn, the undying. So Nibbana isn't a place, it's the extinction, the ending of defilement. Because defilements are impermanent, they're not self, they can be abandoned, although they're tricky and cannot be abandoned just like that, but they can be abandoned because they're still subject to impermanence, they're still not self. And what you get when you abandon them is Nibbana. It's not like the mind goes anywhere. The mind of Nibbana is just the mind of Nibbana. So like you say, is Nibbana a function of Nibbana? It's the mind without any more delusion, any more ignorance, conditioning it. So some people, they say, it's as if Nibbana is there all the time, it's just we don't see it, we don't know it. If you clear away everything that's blocking your vision of Nibbana, then you'll have Nibbana. In the end, it's something you've got to practice and know for yourself. So simple guidelines, I would say, is like if your practice is bringing you more calm, peaceful states of mind, your mind is cooling down. Because that's another attribute of Nibbana, your mind cools down, or the fires of defilements have been extinguished. That's a sign you're going in the right direction. And the question is, are they fully extinguished, or can they emerge again? And of course, the closer you get to Nibbana, the more subtle the defilements become. So the conceit can become very subtle. So say an anagami still has some conceit, even though they have no more strong self-view, and they don't break precepts, and they don't get angry and do things in a coarse way, but they still have a very subtle sense of self-conceit. So at every stage of the noble path, one has to reflect on the Four Noble Truths to see whether there's any craving and attachment and becoming forming in one's experience. And of course, even rupa jhanas, arupa jhanas can be a basis for craving, attachment, becoming, albeit in a very subtle form. So one has to constantly be vigilant and check back on what's going on in your practice. So if one has the great parami to attain rupa jhanas or arupa jhanas, that's a great thing. But one still has to reflect on the fact that they're impermanent, they're not self. And as you say, one can attain jhana and then be reborn in a Brahma realm and attached to that. It can still be an attachment, albeit a very refined, subtle attachment. So one has to keep looking at that, where attachment forms and comes up even to the most refined, subtle states of mind.
Sadhu Lumpo. The next question. I don't have many doubts about the practice. Occasionally, though, the hypothetical arises. If we have been reborn infinite times, why have the conditions for the ending of suffering ever arisen? My only answer is that the Buddha's teaching is a method to get from point A to point B, but not an ultimate truth in itself. What's the right way to contemplate this doubt?
Well, yeah, I would say it's a method based on the Buddha's understanding of the mind, and particularly the way suffering arises and then what brings one to the cessation of suffering. He understands that very well, so he passes that way or that method on to others. So if you look at it as point A and B, I guess it's point A is you're suffering, you're still subject to birth, aging, sickness and death and suffering. Point B is you're no longer subject to birth, aging, sickness and death and suffering. The Dhamma is just the Dhamma, it's just the truth of the way things are, whether a Buddha arises in the world or not, whether anyone realizes it or not. It's just the way things are, it's just the truth. But the Buddha reveals the truth, gets back to that truth because it has disappeared from the world. Not that the truth has disappeared, but people's ability to know the truth and free themselves from samsara disappeared. So the Buddha gets back to that. Yeah, well, because we've had Buddhas and Pacceka Buddhas throughout history, then this method of reaching the end of suffering has been around. And we're lucky in this day and age that we still have the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. That's our good fortune, even though he's gone. But he has disciples, fully awakened disciples, I would say, right up to this day and age, who can also teach this path. So that's our good fortune, isn't it? If we didn't have the Dhamma and the teachings and the way of practice left, then we would be in trouble. It'd be like the Dark Ages. And there'd probably still be some good people in the world doing good things, but it wouldn't be as complete as people practicing for and experiencing Margapala Nibbana. But as you can see, perhaps conditions are getting harder and the number of beings who do practice and realize the Dhamma are getting less, perhaps. I don't know for sure, but perhaps that's true. So hurry up and practice. Don't sit around waiting for some better conditions. I don't think they're going to come. You need to practice now and really dedicate your life to the practice. Don't wait, because better to use what teachings are available now than wait, and some later time they may have disappeared altogether.
Sadhu Lumpo. The next question. Dear Ajahn, when we think about a past unpleasant experience, we have mental suffering, that is Vedana Kanda. What act as the Rupa Kanda in this instance? Thank you for your teachings.
Well, Vedana Khandha, feeling can affect body and mind, so it's quite common that you'll notice sometimes you think of some past experience and it's the subtle unpleasantness of the memory is going on in the mind, but then it can sometimes come up quite strongly in the body, can't it? You can feel pain, tension. You know, when you're remembering a traumatic experience or something that made you really angry before, even though that experience has changed now, it's no longer happening, the person is no longer there, the issue, the situation is no longer in front of you. But that same feeling of pain can start coming up, and it can be a physical feeling as well as a mental, can't it? So the mind and the body affect each other. So sometimes you just get physical pain based on aging or illness. You get a pain in your leg or a toothache or something. If you're not careful, that will affect your mind, and you'll start falling into domanassa, negative mental states, anguish, disappointment, blaming your dentist, blaming someone, cursing the world. It's triggered by a physical pain. And the same thing can go around the other way. You start thinking of something that makes you angry, upset, sad, and there'll be physical symptoms coming up in conjunction with that. So body and mind and the five khandhas, they're affecting each other all the time. The same works with pleasure, isn't it? You get a massage, you feel pleasure, maybe. You eat nice food, you feel pleasure, maybe. And that can be both mental stimulation as well as physical pleasure. So these are the khandhas at work, the process of the khandhas. The important thing is to try to establish mindfulness and then investigate what's going on. And see khandhas as just khandhas. Feeling is just feeling, body is just body. Taking out the grasping, the clinging part of the experience. And that can only be done through mindfulness and wise reflection on what's going on. So if you have some nice food you're eating, okay, you can't deny the pleasure of the taste, but you may reflect, okay, this meal is still impermanent, it will taste nice for a while, I'll eat it and then it's gone. You may reflect with gratitude on whoever cooked the meal or provided the food. You may reflect on the dangers of, if you eat too much, even of good food, it can make you ill in some way. There's a whole range of reflections you can bring up to stop the mind just indulging in pleasure around food or anything else. So a lot of our practice is like this, is around this, developing mindfulness and then training in wise reflection on what's going on. As I was saying earlier with Pavarana, partly you're doing even ceremonies and rituals can help you to let go of bad feeling that you've clung on to, which is part of your khandhas, or somebody else's bad feeling towards you, they may be clinging on. And it's a kind of letting go, changing your karma, changing the direction of your mind, so you forgive them, you let it go, or you receive their admonition, their teaching, and accept that. And you can change karma that way. So it's kind of clearing up various debts, which otherwise just hang around. And you notice, if you keep a karmic debt in mind, it means like over and over again you keep thinking with displeasure about that person or that event or something, or about yourself. It can get worse, can't it? Over time it gets worse, heavier, worse, more extreme. And some people do get ill from that as well, physical illness prompted from their state of mind and trauma and their different negative moods, depression, anguish and so on. And sometimes you meet people who've been told by their doctor, don't get angry because it'll give you a heart problem and you'll die. And it can boil down to that. It's probably someone who's a bit older with a weak heart, but it can boil down to what's your mood? Can you keep your mood even, calm? Because if you don't, if you get too emotional about things, you'll trigger some kind of physical reaction. So sometimes it can even be a matter of life and death.
Sadhu. Lompo. The next question. Good evening, Lompo Kalyano. At the end of the chanting, the verses of paying homage to the Triple Gem, we are to do the 5-point prostration as in Namami. However, as we age, it gets difficult to do the 5-point prostration. Is it that then we should not chant the homage verses because we can't do the 5-point prostration so easily?
No, the whole point is you can still chant in any position, even lying down you can chant, sitting you can chant, standing you can chant, kneeling you can chant. So if you can bow, you bow. If you're on a chair, you can't bow, but you can still raise your hands. You can maybe bow your head. You do what you can as you get older. Your body is no longer flexible and agile like when you were younger. Well, you just adapt. So you can still do it may not be the full 5-point prostration, but you can still show respect in some way or other with your hands, your head. You can still recite those words. You do what you can within the limitations of your health, your body. And even the Buddha, when he got really old, he sometimes had to lie down and have a rest or lean on a tree and get a foot massage. Everyone will get caught by aging, sickness and death. That's the whole point of Buddhist practice, is you're having to deal with that. So the Buddha made allowances. He said, if someone's really sick, there's certain things they may not have to do because they're sick, they can't do it. It doesn't mean to say you stop practicing, but you adapt your practice and you do things slightly differently when you're older. So you just see what you can do, how much of a bow you can do, how much you can chant or recite, and you see how you can adapt to your changing body.
Sadhu. Lompo. The next question. Dear Lompo, please can you explain the second noble truth?
Second noble truth, samudaya, the cause of suffering. The cause of suffering is to be abandoned. That's the practice towards the second noble truth. What is the cause of suffering? Deep down, ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, conditioning the mind, but in practical terms, it's the arising of craving, sensual craving or sensual desire, craving to become, craving not to become. And we often summarize this as liking and disliking, wanting and not wanting. Craving gives rise to clinging, upadana. The craving becomes fixed in your mind and fuels the sense of self, which gives rise to becoming, and you make karma based on your craving, your clinging, your becoming. You make karma, you do things, good and bad, and this gives rise to more birth as well, and more suffering. So craving is the sort of practical root cause of your suffering. On a daily basis, craving is popping up all the time as you react to your different kinds of sense contact, liking, disliking. Craving is to be known with mindfulness and abandon, let go of. We restrain craving with precepts first. You keep a precept. You want to kill the mosquito or the fly or the cockroach. So you have some kind of vipavadanha, craving not to become. I don't want to have a kitchen full of cockroaches. So you have the thought, I want to kill them. That's craving. But you have precepts. I'm not going to kill. I'll forgive the cockroach and I'll try and catch it or sweep it out or do something that doesn't kill them. So precepts are our first practice towards craving. But as you become more mindful, and particularly as you meditate and improve your mindfulness, and you reflect on the Dhamma, you listen to Dhamma, reflect on it, maybe you can actually start uprooting some of the craving in your mind in the intention to kill. you keep saying, no, I'm not going to kill, and you keep ignoring it, letting it go, eventually it might not come up anymore. The cockroaches may still be around, but the intention to kill no longer arises. And you just deal with it in a different way. It's that kind of approach from the coarse through to the refined. And we crave pleasure, so even samadhi and jhana can be a basis for very subtle kinds of attachment to pleasure, and so on. There's the coarse, there's the refined, and you just work from the coarse through to the refined.
Sadhu. Lumpur. The next question. Dear Ajahn, the karma that has been done by us in this life is very weak. It will not produce fruits in this life. It will only produce results in next life. Is this statement true?
Oh, well, I think it's a mixture, isn't it? Some of our karma we are receiving the fruits of on a daily basis, and some of the karma maybe hasn't fully ripened, maybe it will be next life. So the Buddha classified karma into the wholesome and the unwholesome, and then into the strength of the karma, the strength of the intention, and then supportive and obstructive conditions. So, sometimes you do something really good, but an obstructive karma comes up to block you, or you do something really bad and you get away with it because the karma hasn't ripened yet. And that's the one they're always saying, oh, this guy has done so many bad things, how come he seems to be so successful? And the smart Buddhist always says, just wait and see. Maybe next life it will catch up. But it's a mixture, and very difficult to always work things out. Often you get a little bit of notice, a little bit of a short notice that karma is ripening, but still often there's not much you can do other than meet it with mindfulness and wisdom. So good karma, well, still you want to be mindful when the good karma arises. Bad karma, you want to be mindful when that arises, because often that will prompt you to do more bad karma, so you have to be careful. We make karma through our actions, our speech, and then our thoughts, our views, our beliefs. So there's so many avenues for making karma, receiving the fruits of karma, and this body and mind is the product of our karma every day. We're already receiving old karma, and we're making more karma, so try to make good karma, so that things go well for you, things improve, you get closer to the Nibbana, you do more good rather than do more bad.
Sadhu. Lumpur.
Is that the end? Okay.
To the previous question on the second noble truth, is the craving which we are trying to overcome a source of suffering in this life or only in future lives? That is rebirth, old age, sickness, and death. This is what one teacher was saying recently.
Well, if you reach Nibbana in this life, that's it, isn't it? No more rebirth for you. So you can cut off all craving in this life, which the Buddha and the Arahants have done. But we also have to be realistic. Perhaps we can't yet reach Nibbana, but maybe you can reach stage of stream entry, Sotapattimagga Phala, in this life, which at least will reduce the amount of future rebirths. Every time you abandon even a tiny bit of craving, you're reducing its overall impact on your mind. The conditioning process is changing little by little. So every time you abandon the craving, like I was saying earlier, say you hate cockroaches and you have this desire to squash cockroaches, but you keep saying no to that desire. The craving in that particular set of conditions, there's a cockroach, you're there, you want no cockroaches, but you're not giving in to that desire. Little by little by little by little, the desire is going to weaken. And maybe you reach the point where you're completely free from your mind from any desire to kill cockroaches, and maybe that will transfer over to all living creatures. Just don't want to harm anybody or anything living. That's a very powerful kind of good karma that will help to remove a lot of craving from your mind, and that will, if you haven't reached Nibbana at the end of your life, will go with you into your next life. And you might find quite naturally in your next life you are inclined towards not killing, because a lot of craving has been removed from your mind. So, you just keep practicing from where you're at with your personality, your karma, your particular set of conditions, but try to bring in the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path into your thinking and your way you do things, your decision making. And little by little you're eradicating craving and undermining it, and if you're not indulging craving, then it's going to get weakened. Whether you're ready to completely abandon it, well, that's a big ask, but you certainly can reduce it and weaken it day by day as you practice. That's what you're doing. If you're following the Buddhist path, keeping precepts, practicing dana, generosity, developing mindfulness, meditating, all of this is helping you to abandon craving. And if you really put your heart in it, you might abandon a lot of craving in this life. And you'll be much happier.